Hello, everybody. I am Teri Finneman. I am a journalism professor at the University of Kansas. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about my journalism background in a minute. But I'm here today to talk to you about my work to reconsider the business model for weekly newspapers. And the focus of this started with oral histories that I conducted with Will Maury during COVID. So we interviewed some journalists in Louisiana as well, from North Dakota down to Louisiana, talking with journalists in the summer of 2020 about the impact that COVID was having on your newsrooms. And, you know, at a time when journalism was absolutely critical, local journalism in particular, there were too many people struggling because of our current business model when advertising fell through. And of course, discussions about the business model is not new. This is something that's been talked about for decades. But to me, COVID served really as a wake-up call that we need to think about making some changes and take this a little more seriously so that we don't have this kind of additional stress in the future. I'm also interested in this topic because I'm actually a weekly newspaper publisher myself, in addition to being a professor. 3 years ago, I started a newspaper in the town of Eudora, Kansas. It's about 15 minutes from the University of Kansas. It's a town of about 6,000 people that was a news desert. They lost their newspaper during the Great Recession. They didn't have local news for a decade until we started providing them news. So I'm the editor and publisher, and then my students at the University of Kansas are the reporters. I know a lot about having to make money myself, as I'm still active in the journalism industry today and up to speed on what the concerns are. And then I'm also a journalism historian as well. I'm the producer of the Journalism History podcast, and my research primarily focuses on history. And so one of the messages that I try to get across that most people aren't familiar with is that the business model used by journalism today was created in 1833. We are literally using a business model that is almost 200 years old, and that was invented when Andrew Jackson was president. So it's no wonder that it's not working well for us today. The penny press model of cheap subscriptions and relying on advertising for revenue was invented by the man in the left corner. He was a 23-year-old who came up with this business model, Benjamin Day. And so I would argue that after 200 years, it's probably a good idea to start thinking about something different. Because when you think about it, you know, back then the penny press, right, 1 cent. Most weeklies are selling themselves for $1 on the newsstand. So in 200 years, literally the cost of a newspaper has only gone up by 99 cents, which is really mind-blowing when you think about it. And so in the focus groups that we've had with readers, in the discussions that we've had with newspaper editors, I'm arguing that we really need to make much clearer to the public that if they are only paying $1 a week for our weekly newspaper, that is literally 14 cents a day that they are paying. 14 cents, right? When you say it out loud, it's crazy. Okay, so we need to put this in a little better perspective for readers that, you know, 14 cents a day isn't really realistic for us anymore. So this is why we need to make some changes. So the research that my team focused on, Pat Ferrucci in Colorado and Nick Matthews in Minnesota at the time, we were trying to do a national survey of publishers to get a feel for what they thought about the business model. Unfortunately, journalists don't tend to like to fill out surveys that come from universities. So we didn't get as good of a response as we wanted. Most of the responses that we got were from the states in the middle, the gold states, North Dakota down to Oklahoma. So that's what our research is based upon, but we still believe that this applies to weeklies across the country. So we collected data from 600 people that I'm presenting to you today. We had 132 publishers from North Dakota down to Oklahoma fill this out. I'm from North Dakota myself. I should mention that's what my accent is, if you can hear it. I'm from a town of 2,500 people in Western North Dakota. So we had about 130 publishers, and then we also did a survey of readers. And we hired a professional survey company to do this and specifically told them, we only want to hear from rural people. Like, don't ask people in Fargo and Omaha and Sioux Falls to fill this out because we really don't care what they think. We only want to hear from people in rural communities of 10,000 or fewer people. So all of those reader surveys are from North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas, all living in rural communities. Then after we did that, we took the results that we found and we did focus groups with weekly publishers from those states to get their input. And now we are in the process, we are a few months in of actually doing this experiment with what I'm about to talk to you about. But backing up just a little bit more demographics about the publishers. So we surveyed the publishers in December and January of this past year, had a pretty good split of men and women filling it out. Quite a few of them were 61 and older, and virtually all of them are in communities of 3,000 or fewer people. Of course, many of them own multiple newspapers, so that's why you see such a spread in the population size, because some of them own like 3, 4, 5 newspapers, so they check the box for each one. But in general, all of the publishers who responded are coming from communities of 3,000 or fewer people. And the main thing that we wanted to know from them is, what revenue streams are you open to? Because we wanted to get feedback from a whole lot of people to see what they thought as we came up with a new formula for the business model. And what we ended up finding is it wasn't even close, that they continued to check the boxes for the 1800s business model of advertising, print subscriptions, and legal notices. Now, one of the things that I like to argue, I don't know what the situation is in Louisiana, but I know it's an issue here in the heartland, is legislatures keep threatening to take away legal notices, right? So by coming up and transitioning to a new business model, that takes away some of the fear. Like, what happens if legal notices go away? For some newspapers, that could be devastating. So the time is now to start thinking about how to bring in different revenue in case legal notices do end up going away at some point. But as I said, it wasn't even close. The publishers who filled out the survey still clung to the current business model. And the least popular options, we ended up giving them 15 different options to check, and they could check as many as they were interested in. The least popular options were memberships, e-newsletters, large donations, and government support. Okay, so that is what we got from the publishers. So after we did that, we took pretty much the same questions we asked the publishers and then asked them of our rural readers. And we did a representative survey, although we ended up having more senior citizens fill it out in some states than the portion of the population. But we got a wide spread of people between 18 and senior citizens who filled out the survey from each of the 4 states. And we asked them pretty much the same question, just tailored to them. How likely would you be willing to financially support your local newspaper in these areas? And we gave them the same options that the publishers got. And we got very different answers. So the good news for weekly publishers, something that I'm sure you already know, print subscriptions still very much wanted, right, by rural readers. But then you see a very different system here. The number one answer was events. And that makes a lot of sense because, like I said, I'm from a town of 2,500 people where the most common phrase is there's nothing to do. People in rural communities want things to do. And this would really bring newspapers back to their historical role of really being the centerpiece of a community, the discussion point of a community. When you look back at Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst and all of the community engagement type of work, I mean, we wouldn't have the Statue of Liberty if it wasn't for Joseph Pulitzer engaging readers, through his newspaper and being that kind of central focus point. It really makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure you're obviously familiar with the Texas Tribune and the successful event model that they have had. So I thought that was really interesting. E-newsletters, right? I mean, post-COVID, even before COVID, but really after COVID, really living in a time where people want news immediately. One of the problems with my hometown local newspaper is by the time the paper comes out Wednesday, people have talked about it in the coffee shop for days already. So it's old. So readers are wanting information in a more timely manner. And then they were also interested in memberships, which we'll talk about more. We defined it to them as a perk beyond a subscription. So we left it kind of open. Of course, readers very familiar with memberships, right? They have a Prime membership through Amazon. They have gym memberships, right? So this is a term that is familiar to them. Readers least likely to support, and again, these are readers, not advertisers, so it's or businesses. So it's not a surprise that commercial printing and marketing would rank lower because that wasn't the demographic. But it is interesting to note that digital subscriptions was lower. They still very much value that printed newspaper as well. Other notable trends. We asked them how likely they would be to donate to their paper. Just donate money, right? Some of the newspapers took that on during COVID, asked for donations. My newspaper, we're a different model because we are run out of the University of Kansas, but my newspaper is 100% donation funded. A little bit of ads, but as I'm sure you struggle with, finding an ad rep is not easy. So we are 100% donation funded. And we found that 40% of people, if you simply told them you needed help, you need more revenue to do more news, 40% of people would be willing. That's 40% free cash that's just out there and available if you asked for it, right? So we thought that was interesting. What was also fascinating is that almost 2/3 of people said they were open to the idea of taxpayer support. Now, I'm fully aware of the US journalism industry and our, relationship with government and the tension there and how that's controversial with publishers to even consider. But other countries do that, right? Other countries in Europe do get taxpayer support to make sure that they have strong local news and it stays stable. So I don't expect taxpayer support to really become a thing in the United States anytime soon. But I just find it interesting to point out that people are probably more open to it than you may think. Other kind of interesting data to think about, we have gobs and gobs of data that can be analyzed forever. We wanted to break it down a little bit by age and gender to see how responses differed there. And we ended up finding out, we asked the question, if you knew your newspaper was struggling to stay open, would you be willing to pay more money to help them? And we ended up finding that men were actually more likely than women to say that they would help out. And another striking finding is that most people tend to think it's the older demographic, right? Keeping newspapers alive. But when we asked, would you give more money to save your newspaper? It was actually the younger generations who were more willing to step in. Now, part of that has to do with senior citizens being on a limited income. We got that response fairly often. I don't have additional money, I'm on Social Security, et cetera. So I think that the newspaper industry has too readily blown off the younger demographic and has had too much of an emphasis on the older demographic when there's a lot of potential. I mean, look at this, on the screen, 18 to 34-year-olds. In the case overall by age, 18 to 34 was more willing to give you money than senior citizens were, right? So there is a great demographic and great potential there to think about. So overall, what we ended up finding is the dad demographic, actually. Men between the ages of 35 and 54 were most likely to say that they would give additional financial support to help their newspapers. So for any of your advertising folks who may be interested in this, I think much more targeting could be done of the dad demographic. And then, as I mentioned, really the worst support came from the boomers, 55 and older, as far as being willing to give more money. Now, it's not clear to me why men were more likely than women to give. That was a surprising trend that we saw, so we didn't anticipate needing to ask a question about that. But it's certainly interesting to see. As long as we were asking them about money, we wanted to ask them some questions about content as well, right? Because you need to take in mind the whole picture here of not just the revenue stream, but putting out a product that people want to invest in the first place. And so we asked readers to prioritize what content in your weekly newspaper do you like the best? Probably not surprising to anybody, obituaries, right? Number one. So I think that there is much more that newspapers could be doing with obituaries. I know that Kristen here at Pointer has also really been promoting in recent years doing more with feature obituaries, taking what you get from the funeral home, blowing it up and doing a feature on that person's life, right? Those kinds of things can drive a lot of traffic for you. Of course, features, that's not a surprise either. Things to do, just putting together a weekly list of things to do, very popular with people. What was most interesting to me, though, from this list was that opinion ranked so poorly. Only about a fourth of people who filled out this survey valued opinion in their weekly newspaper. And we got a lot of comments about that, and you're going to see some of that. So I have different versions of this presentation by state. I'm showing you the North Dakota version, although I should back up. What I'm showing you right now is from all 4 states that we looked at. The comments I'm going to show you are specifically from North Dakota. But what we ended up hearing from people is that they are so inundated with opinion everywhere. It's on the cable news that they watch. It's on their social media. I mean, the last 5 years have just been a nightmare of opinions coming from everywhere, that what they want from you is news. They just want news and to drown out all the other stuff. And we also found with some of the readers that there tends to be a disconnect, right? That a lot of journalists, editors tend to be more liberal, not all of them, of course, but there are a number of journalists that tend to be more liberal who are in conservative communities. And when they're putting their opinions on page 4, that's not sitting well with their readers and is turning some people off. And it's also hard for people to understand. And when you say it out loud, it really makes sense. It's hard to tell people that we're objective journalists on page 1, but we're allowed to have opinions on page 4, and that's different, right? Like you can understand how that may be difficult for people today who aren't overly media literate to understand that. So obviously opinion has been a foundation of newspapers since the beginning, since 1690, right? Opinion has played a role in our industry, but it's something to think about. Is that really the best use of our time and space to have those opinion pages, or could we focus more on news and what readers are telling us that they want from us? So as I mentioned, here are some of the North Dakota specific comments. I'd like if my news showed up before it was old. Okay, so that goes into why e-newsletters were popular with people, not having to wait days to get information. And then, as I mentioned, pointing out that they wanted less editor opinion, less political stuff. People are just tired out and they're over it. This I thought was a very savvy comment, write articles themselves. So this person could tell when the newspaper is just slapping in news releases into the paper to fill space. That was interesting to me. But I mean, what's really great news for you is how many comments we got about they want more. They want news from their local communities. Please give us more, right? And so that needs to shift with our messaging of we can give you so much more if we make these changes to bring in more funding to be able to help local news thrive better. What was also just mind-blowing to me is the data of how many people didn't know their local journalists. Now, there's a thing in North Dakota where, we pretty much only get flights from Minneapolis, I mean, Denver, whatever, but there's pretty much a thing that if you were on a flight from Minneapolis to Bismarck or Minneapolis to Fargo, odds are high you have somebody in common with the person sitting next to you. I mean, it's a pretty tight state. So even in North Dakota, I was shocked that 63% of people said they did not know who was at their local newspaper office. They did not know. And that plays out for a lot of reasons. Pew has done this research before, that there's a large number of people who don't even know their local journalists anymore because there's so many fewer of us than there used to be. And that creates issues with trust. That makes us be, the enemy of the people when they can't put a face to us. And we're showing it actually had a financial impact as well, because people who knew their local journalists were twice as likely to say they would pay more to support local journalism than those who didn't know a journalist. So thinking about how to get more out into the community, right? Having these events, we're going to talk about Press Club and what this model is, about how they're trying to reach out and get to know more of the people in the community, put a face to the newspaper, meet new people, is also really, really important, not only to trust and democracy and the bigger mission of what we do, but also to our financial picture. So asking the question again, because we asked this a few different ways, if you knew your newspaper was struggling, would you help? And this was pretty standard across all states, that about 50% of people, no questions asked, would help. Another 25% would need to be talked into it. And then there's just 25% of people who are just kind of deplorable, who won't do anything, which is pretty standard for no matter what, right? So there's really a substantial amount of people in your communities who are likely willing to pay more and help you more if they knew that you needed it. So breaking down so you can see some of the total number of categories that we asked about. This again is reader input. We had 68% of people in North Dakota very likely, somewhat likely, support taxpayer support. Print subscriptions, very high. Ads classified, a little lower. We know that, right? Digital subscription, kind of hanging in there, but not one of the most popular items. Instead, it was really donations, events, memberships, and the e-newsletter that people tended to really favor. So looking through all this data, my team thought, okay, print subscriptions, still good, but let's take a look at events, donations, memberships, and e-newsletters, adding these factors into the business model to have less reliance on advertising. So before we came up with our final model, we wanted to go back to weekly publishers and ask them what they thought about this. And it's a good thing we did. Because we quickly found out that it was over their dead body would many of these publishers accept donations. Really? Which was extremely surprising to us. And part of this could be because these people were from the heartland, from, you know, the upper Great Plains, where it's a very kind of proud, hardy, we survive blizzards mentality. And also very, very strongly conservative as well. And so the answers that we got about donations was people viewed this as it would be a sign of weakness, that they were failing at business if they had to go begging for handouts. Okay, they took it as a bad sign. Businesses don't ask for donations, you know, we're a business. And then other people said, you know, there's just too many other people in my community who are asking for money. I don't even want to do that. Okay. So people were so adamantly against putting donations into their business model that my team and I had no choice but to scrap that really? From our final experiment. But I tell you that because there is great, great potential there for that strategy. Now, as far as the memberships, when we asked people about that, every single time we did a focus group, there was a long pause, and then somebody would say, I don't really know what that means. So education is a huge gap, right? Like getting this out to you guys who are so busy about what the potential even is. So they didn't know how memberships would work. Some people think the current 200-year-old business model is just fine, thank you, and they have no interest in changing. But overall, people are just risk averse. They're just afraid to try something new. And then, of course, time, right? You all know it. I know it. I ended up covering a planning commission meeting until 11 p.m. last night, and then had to wake up to write it. So I understand time. You know, this would just take too much time. I don't have the time to do this. I don't even have the time to think about this, right? I'm just overwhelmed, okay? So that's the reaction that we got with publishers. So from there, my team partnered with a weekly newspaper publisher in Kansas, who is on the call and will be talking to you shortly. I had met Joey, I think maybe briefly a time or two before, and knew that he had a reputation of being a young, up-and-coming publisher who wasn't afraid to try new things, who owns a handful of newspapers, weekly newspapers in Kansas, ranging in populations from 2,800 to 20,000, right? And had some great experience. So Joey agreed to partner with us for an entire year and try our business model and see how it would go for them. And so the model that we ended up creating is memberships, e-newsletters, and events. Now they're still doing advertising, obviously, and what their regular business model was, but they are adding further diversification to what they were doing before to see how these new revenue streams could boost their company. So with memberships, Joey's going to talk to you in a minute about Press Club. That's what they're calling their model. This is what we want to take off nationwide. We want every weekly newspaper across the country to use this term called Press Club and develop a membership program based on this. We got them some tutoring from Forum Communications on how to beef up their e-newsletter. And then they are looking at, they've already started this, expanding the events that they do to bring people in the community together. So where we're at right now is, they're frequently meeting, they're making stakeholder connections, and we've done a lot of publicity for this because we are hoping to make this a national discussion once Joey wraps up his 1-year timeline for this. In fact, I think we're going to start on this actually during Christmas break already. We're going to be creating how-to handouts that we can distribute to publishers across the nation to make this easier for you. If you are interested in trying this business model, yes, here are the steps to do it. Here are the lessons that Joey learned of things to do and things not to do. To be able to give you these kinds of easy steps. But right now I'm going to start talking and I'm going to turn it over to Joey, who can tell you a little bit about how they're doing this experiment. They have a lot of leeway, right? My research team just gave them these general guidelines, memberships, e-newsletters, events, and then their team has had a lot of leeway to think about how they want to interpret that. So Joey, go ahead.
All right. So yeah, we were excited to try this out, and we started doing Press Club in June. What we've been doing is essentially doubling our subscription price for Press Club members. So they were paying $60 a year. Now we're asking for $120 if you're going to be a Press Club member.
Wow.
What you get with Press Club is you get to go to, and before I say all this stuff, I want to just make it clear that not every newspaper would have to do what we're doing. They could come up with their own whatever. What we did was we looked at our community and where some gaps were. So like our current chamber doesn't host after-hour mingles. And so we're like, why don't we do that? So we host Press Club after-hour mingles once a month. We're in the process of getting businesses to start hosting them in their business right now. But we've been doing it at our office for the time being, just to kind of get it consistent and get people showing up. We're really just trying to focus on making the experience good and listening to people and what they want to do. The other thing that we've found was that young people there's really only, you can meet people at the church. So we've been trying to add a few things that like staff members like to do anyway. So like one of our staff members goes and plays bar trivia on Thursdays. And so he was like, well, why don't we have a Press Club team? And like, I'll represent the newspaper and we'll have a Press Club team, and we'll do bar trivia. And so we've had like different people show up for bar trivia every time we've done it. And Adam already goes and does that. So like, it wasn't really adding anything to his day or anything. He was already going regardless. So we tried to find stuff that we could add and do stuff. We're gonna have Press Club t-shirts where everybody who's a member is going to get a Press Club t-shirt. And then we may do a coffee mug next year or something different. I don't know. But so far, we have 118, 19 members, something like that. We've sold some corporate sponsorships. And it's been slow. I want to be honest. Like this is a new concept to a lot of people. And so it takes time for people to kind of notice what's going on and ask questions. People do not just jump in head first usually on stuff, but like every month we've seen growth, and we expect eventually for the floodgates, maybe not a good term, but like eventually will open up, and like we're going to see a lot more people start joining once we get to a certain threshold. And our corporate sponsors are really happy about this, because this is a cheap benefit that they're able to give to their employees. One of the benefits, the corporate sponsorship, was that they could pick a certain number of members that they could make as a Press Club members. We would send them the newspaper. So it's actually increased circulation a little bit, because what we had is we had a bunch of banks. We had 2 banks, for instance. I think all of our banks do this, but only 2 of them have become corporate sponsors. They'd get like 2-3 editions of the paper at the office, and then they'd all read it at the office. Well, now they still get the edition at the office, but we're sending the paper to their Press Club members at their homes. And we get to count that as paid circulation, because the company gave us $1,500 for them to be Press Club members. And so I see that as a big benefit as well. We've done we did a field trip where there was an event my wife and I wanted to go to in a neighboring town. A friend of ours owns the brewery there, and they were having a big anniversary party. So we organized a Press Club field trip, and we said, hey, this is going to happen, and all these people from Newton are going to go, so you should go. And we organized field trip. And I think that's the biggest things we've done so far, as far as like events / physical things. We've added e-newsletters, which have been really successful so far. We really didn't know what we were doing with that, but we've grown our base with our e-newsletter quite a bit. And we really view that as a way for us to eventually create more subscriptions, because Facebook recently announced that they're really going to stop news in their feeds. Like they're completely, we already noticed that they were throttling all our news stories, and the only stories we're getting any traction were features, but like they're throttling all this down. And so e-newsletters is going to be a way for us to sell subscriptions. Our website has a like 95% hard paywall, and we just pick and choose some of the stories that we put in front of it. So we feel like the e-newsletters are really going to help us get the brand in front of more people and more interest in the stories we're writing about. And that's worked so far. And then the final thing, as far as all that goes, was doing some events, like actual, like we viewed it as like bigger events, like community events. We already host a concert once a year called Blues, Brews, and Barbecue that draws about 1,100 people to our city park. We're adding another event in the spring. We've already spoken with the proper people in at the city to get that set up, and we're just doing some planning. What we have found is that our flagship newspaper is situated 25 minutes from downtown Wichita, which is our metro area in Kansas, for my region of the state. And people are sick of driving south 25 minutes to Wichita every single weekend. So if you give them an excuse to hang out in town, they're willing to go and spend money. And in Kansas, every business, it doesn't matter who they are really, nonprofits, whatever, you can apply for 4 special use permits a year, as long as it's approved by the city, you can sell beer for a profit. So for us, it's like, hey, we can host an event, we can make money on beer sales. And, the one in the spring we're going to do is we're going to have some food trucks show up. We're going to have a tiny bit of entertainment, and we're going to do like a food truck rally, a little bit of entertainment, and we're going to sell beer, and it's going to be downtown. We anticipate, based off of the concert, we actually anticipate making about $7,000 on this event, which is a huge deal for our bottom line. It's not hitting up the same old advertisers for another special section. It's getting more revenue out of readers. And so like, we've really tried to push for more revenue out of readers. And the reason we were interested in this model in the first place is that our company has always believed in this anyway. Like we've tried to do books that we'll sell to readers. We're always like, how do we provide value to readers and get more money out of our readers rather than going to the same advertisers over and over and over again, knowing that they're really just shifting their budget. The more special sections we add, they're just going to lower something somewhere else. We're not actually adding any real revenue. So that's been our strategy. We are going to continue doing Press Club past this year. So like, we're going to try to continue to collect data as we go. I think that this is something, it's some scale. It doesn't matter what scale you do it at. I do think that saying, hey, even at this small level, you say, hey, we're going to host an open house once a year at the office to thank Press Club members, and you're going to get a mug. And we're just asking those of you who want to support the newspaper and the community to spend an extra $20 or $50 or whatever it is, whatever is scalable at your level. But even on that tiny scale, it's worth doing because it's really not that much work. And let's say you get 10% of your readers to say, I'll support the newspaper a little more. I really could stand to spend a little extra money and I like the product. You're increasing how much money you're getting out of from your readers rather than from your advertisers, which at this point, I think all of us know are pretty tapped out as far as a resource. So, I mean, at any level, I believe that this is a model that could add to your bottom line. It may not be a ton, but it could add to your bottom line. And when we're looking for revenue sources, especially easy ones, this feels like a simple solution.
Yeah, so, part of what Joey did is they just tweaked the wording, right, on their annual subscription notices. Joey, why don't you talk about that?
Oh, yeah. So, like, the subscription notices that we're sending out, we essentially say, here's how much it costs to renew for just the newspaper. And then here's what Press Club is. And if you want to be a member of Press Club, or if you just want to support the newspaper more, here's how much that costs. And so we really haven't added any work as far as that goes because we're already sending out renewal notices. So we just changed how the renewal notice looked and what was in it. And we are mailing those out to readers with the renewals. And by large, most people do just re-up for the paper. But every single person who writes in that they want to be a Press Club member is just a double the subscription that for no extra money. We really aren't doing any extra work. And so it's really been useful. And every month we have a few people who just sign up to be in Press Club.
Yeah, so one of the things, that Joey and I have been talking about throughout this process is to help give readers this transition time. We did want to leave the regular subscription price there, right, for people to have time to get used to it. And then you can think about for your own newspaper, what would make sense. Could you have 2 tiers of Press Club? Maybe you charge people $20 more a year for a subscription and you give them a $5 mug, and then you're clearing an extra $15 per reader. Or maybe you have a 3rd level of Press Club where, like Joey said, they're invited to special events, special community gatherings. Joey, I know that you talked before that you were looking at maybe having like a special session with the mayor, right? Where press club members could come and ask the mayor or politicians questions, right? It's again, as I said at the beginning, having the newspaper be that kind of central foundation of community engagement, and how can you get involved with that?
Yeah, we're looking at doing a lot of different stuff, and we're just experimenting right now. Like, really what we're doing is we're just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, which we found to be actually a really effective method with this. But you know, not everything's been perfect. Like, we organized a dinner. We were like, hey, you know, like, let's just cash mob a restaurant, and we'll take RSVPs on our website, and we'll go to this dinner. So we had 16 people sign up to go to this dinner. I call the restaurant, say, hey, we're gonna have 16 people at X time. They get us all set up, and we had 12 people show up. And so 4 people RSVP'd and didn't come. And so we were like, all right, well, how do we fix that problem? The restaurant didn't care because they had 12 people, but like, we organized it. Everybody went, had fun. But like, we were like, all right, we probably need to figure out how to like adjust for people just signing up for something and then not showing up, or like what we need to do with some of this stuff. But it's all about just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And you know, the people who went to the dinner had fun, and they said, hey, we should do this again. We're like, and so we are going to do it again. We're just trying to figure out how to, you know, deal with the RSVP stuff.
And I think, Joey, the last time we talked, so, you know, Joey's only been doing this for a few months, right? He's the guinea pig, taking all the cuts here so that it's easier for you guys when we make the final packet. But I think you mentioned before that when you looked at revenue and expenses, that you had cleared $4,000 in the first few months.
Yes. So we essentially targeted some corporate sponsors that didn't spend a lot of money with us. So like, we specifically went after people who we felt like were good targets. One of the banks in town recently merged with a larger bank from out of town, and they let us know that they were cutting their advertising. They used to run ROP every single week as the small community bank, and now they really just run in special sections. And they're like, we're really more community minded. So we're like, cool, will you be sponsor of Press Club? And they immediately signed up for that. Well, that $1,500 makes up for a huge portion of what they were spending in ROP. So we kind of replaced that revenue while making it essentially circulation instead of advertising. But they get to be Press Club sponsors now, which they like better than running ROP. So yeah, a lot of it was finding corporate sponsors that we felt like were good partners. And I'm going to do another round of looking for more corporate sponsors when we do this again in like a few months. Like, I'm going to do this again in a few months and see if we can't find a few more. But like, one of them was like the city of Newton. They don't advertise in the paper. But they did sign up to be Press Club members, and they saw value in it. So we felt like that was a good partnership. So like, we've cleared a decent chunk of money on this already, and it's 100% been worth it. None of us have felt like it's been too much work.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that. So, you know, Joey's said frequently in these conversations that it really, you know, we had that concern about time. I don't have time, right? They're doing this when they're out on their regular advertising calls. They're doing this when their reporters are out talking to people. Hey, have you heard about Press Club? Hey, are you into, right? They're doing it, incorporating it into their work already. And then what, you know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes to rewrite the annual subscription notice and put in some new wording, right? I mean, these are just really simple steps that you can do.
We're absolutely not dedicating like a bunch of work to this. If we would, we might actually increase the numbers more. But we are very passively doing this. We are like, when we're talking, I was at a sales call earlier and like I mentioned Press Club. I was like, hey, you know, I made little cards. And so we're handing them out to people and be like, hey, come to our next mingle. Come check this out. And so we are doing this very passively as far as that goes. We're doing the renewals and trying to explain Press Club and the renewals. We're not doing some massive like door to door, hey, you need to be involved in this. It's very slow, it's very passive, and it's not a lot of work. We are doing a chamber talk. They do breakfasts. Apparently, the chamber is really only interested in working during like 8 to 5. So everything they do is during the workday. But they have a breakfast once a month that companies can sign up for. And we are going to do a presentation on Press Club. And we think we'll generate a decent amount of traffic for that next month.
All right. Do you guys have any questions for us? Questions, comments? Your reporters, feel free to ask. Okay, well, over the coming months, Joey and I and my team will be working on these packets, as I mentioned, that we are happy to, will be happy to share with state newspaper associations. But I mean, this is something that you could very easily start immediately, right? Start in time for the holidays. Think about if you just want to hand out a t-shirt or, you know, one of the things that we had talked about before too is partnering with advertisers in your community to make like a coupon discount card or something, right? That if you're a member of Press Club, then you can get a discount at local businesses or something like that, right? Like Joey said, it's about knowing your community and what their passions are and what they're interested in and how you can increase your subscription prices and think about what extra perk above that could you give them to be a Press Club member.
Yeah, when we roll this out in our other communities, I don't live obviously in all those communities. So like it's been really easy for us in Newton to say, all right, like mingles and trivia and all this stuff that like we already go to were the answer. But like in Hillsborough, the answer is probably going to be a shirt and a discount card and some stuff that's a little easier because our staff's a lot smaller there. We may not do a lot of this like in-person stuff that our staff here was really excited about. We're really going to try to make this applicable for each paper and roll it out with purpose as far as that goes, rather than just cookie cutter it. So what we do for mingles is it's literally just it's an after hours mingle. We have beer and snacks, and we invite members to come hang out and talk to people and BS. It's a lot of members from the community. Chambers, at least around here, used to do this all the time. The town I grew up in, the chamber still does this and has like, you know, 60, 80 people show up every single month. Our chamber here just doesn't do it. And I don't know why, but it was a gap that we felt like, oh, well, you know, we'll host essentially a business after hours, but you know, it's for Press Club members.
And what was interesting to me, because I attended the first one, is how many people were new to the community and didn't know anybody and like really wanted to meet some friends, like millennials, right? I was just, every time I turned around, somebody's like, oh, I'm new here. I was like, okay, right? They came to the newspaper office. They heard about it, right? That was really cool.
We did make it open to the public, the first one, and we advertised it in the newspapers. We advertised Press Club every week in the newspapers, just as a house ad. But we made a Facebook group and like or a Facebook event, whatever. And, you know, we asked people to come. And we did. We had a really good crowd. And honestly, I feel like every newspaper at least once a year should do that. have people in your office, buy beer. We spend less than usually less than $150 on snacks and beer. It's super cheap. It gets a bunch of people into your office, open it to the public, have people come to your office, mingle with your readers, let them meet you. It's really, I would encourage every newspaper to do that, period.
Yeah, and then, I mean, you've said before too, like the focus groups. So the research team and I have gone to see Joey a few times, and each time we went, we did focus groups with readers in 2 of the communities and just had people come and give input, right? What do you like about the newspaper? What would you like to be different? And Joey can say that's not always fun to hear.
No.
But, you know, those people, we showed them that we really cared what they thought, and we really listened to what they thought. And some of their ideas made sense.
So yeah, I think anytime you can engage with people and show them that you are, you know, just like they are, you live in the community, you care about, you know, the town, you obviously invest in the community through your newspaper. It really breaks down a lot of barriers, you know, especially in the Midwest. A lot of people have this vision of the media, and it's a lot easier when you're like, oh no, that's my neighbor, like he lives down the street. So we always try to get, even before this press club thing, we try to get people to come to our office, talk to the reporters. We used to host, and we need to do it again. We haven't done it since the pandemic, but we used to host like a coffee once a quarter, where we would just buy a couple of Cambros of coffee at the coffee shop. And it was just anybody who wanted to come get a cup of coffee and talk to the editor and the publisher, just come. If you got 3 minutes, come get the coffee and then leave. It doesn't matter. We used to do that like once a quarter. We always were trying to find ways to engage with the public. And one of the things that might be helpful to hear is that we did this from a startup mentality. So our flagship newspaper in Newton is actually a startup. It's only 7 years old. So like, we weren't a legacy brand. We had to scratch and claw and get people to meet us. We had to start from somewhere. And so we were always looking to do this stuff. And it's been super beneficial in going from nothing to something. Because when we started the paper, we had 200 subscribers. And now we circulate 4,000 papers. And so it's really beneficial, I feel like, to get in front of people and talk. That was our best engagement opportunity. Like we went and talked to every Kiwanis Club, Rotary, old people group. We actively were asking to speak. And so I would benefit anybody I think that benefits any newspaper.
Last call for questions. We got 4 minutes left. Okay, well, thank you so much to those who joined today. If you know folks at other newspapers, this is being recorded. I encourage them to watch this recording later.